You're welcome.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Special Olympics Kansas Virtual Health and Fitness Community Involvement Thursday with K-State Research and Extension / SNAP Ed. Today we have Tandy and Tom with us. They are going to be teaching us how to do garden planting and preparation, which is going to be playing into our larger program, the Grow a Garden program, which is starting on May 3rd. We will get your toolkits sent out to you guys next week so that you can be prepared to start garden planting on May 3rd, which is going to be ready, set, plant. Get it? Haha. Okay, so before we begin, let's start with our athlete introductions today. And what you're going to do is say your name and the plant that you are most looking forward to planting, or your favorite type of fruit or vegetable you like to eat. Okay? All right, so we'll start with Jennifer. Go ahead.
I'm Jennifer, and I'm from Kansas City, Kansas. My favorite vegetable is cucumbers.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. All right, and this is Jennifer's first time at Virtual Health and Fitness. Everyone give her a round of applause for joining. Thank you so much. And Tyler, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tyler Griswold. I'm an athlete for Sitwick County Thundercat, and I'm a health register for Special Olympic Kansas. I'm going to say thanks for United Healthcare working for me and work for them. I can't wait to start planting my garden. I think about it, grow tomatoes and some peppers.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. Bo.
My name is Bo Reno. I'm a half master in Kansas, and my tomato jalapenos and peppers.
Awesome. Thank you, Bo. Gigi.
I'm Gigi Fisher, and I'm from Wichita, Kansas, and my favorite fruit is blueberries.
Very good. Lena.
Hi, I'm Linda Hodson. I'm from Special Olympics, Missouri, and I'm a health messenger. And I can't wait to grow some herbs.
Very good. Luke.
Hi, my name's Luke. I'm a health messenger, and I'm with my house Special Olympics. And I'll try planting some corn, cauliflower, and some broccoli.
So thank you, Luke. Kaylee.
Hi, I'm Kaylee McLaughlin. I'm from Illinois. I'm a health messenger in Illinois, and I cannot wait to grow green peppers.
Thank you, Kaylee. Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie, and my favorite fruit is strawberries.
Thank you. Carol.
My name is Combat, and my favorite is tomato watermelon.
Good. Becca.
Hi, my name is Becca Henderson, and my favorite, what I like to grow is cherry tomatoes and regular tomatoes.
Very good. And Morgan. Rich.
My name is Morgan Rich. I'm from Kirksville, Missouri, and I'm going to try to grow cucumbers and tomatoes.
Thank you. Very good. Tony.
All right. My name is Tony, and my favorite to grow is I'll grow some like tomatoes, and then I'll grow some onions.
Nice. All right, Addison.
Hi, I'm Addison, and I'm looking forward to growing some carrots.
Good job, Addison. Gary.
There. Okay, go.
Hi, my name is Gary Hall. I grow up to cucumbers.
Cucumbers. All right. Is it Gloria or Taverick there?
And his mom's name is Anita, not Gloria, Jesse.
Well, there is a Gloria.
Okay.
And then Taverick is usually on Anita's, but we will pass on them today. Let's have Maria introduce yourself.
Hey guys, my name is Maria, and I am part of the Special Olympics staff. I am working under Unified Champion Schools, and I am going to be growing some jalapenos with my mom.
Awesome. And Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie Schnee. I'm a coach with Manhattan Special Olympics, And I've got a crew from my science class that are going to be growing lots of stuff. I asked today, and we're excited to grow tomatoes. And a lot of us really want to grow some hot peppers.
Awesome. Good job. Is Taverick there? I hear you.
Taverick is on a national Zoom call, but this is his partner, Anita. And I am looking forward to anything that will really grow for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Anita. All right. That wraps it up. So I'm going to pass it over to Tandy and Tom to lead today's presentation. Tandy and Tom, can you tell us who you are, what you do, why you do it, and just anything and everything you'd like to share with our Special Olympics athletes?
Sure, I'll start because Tom's really the star of today's show. But I'm Tandy Rendis, and I work with K-State Research and Extension, the SNAP Education Program, and I'll work with a lot of the staff that will be doing nutrition classes that many of you will be hopefully a part of as part of a Grow a Garden. So we'll get to see you again in some nutrition classes too, because you're going to grow these great fruits and vegetables. We want you to eat them too. And we'll talk about that and how it can impact our health and keep us as healthy and vital as possible as we are athletes, all of you. So nice to meet you all, and thanks for letting me be here. Tom, over to you.
Great. Yeah, my name is Tom Buller, and I am the horticulture extension educator in Lawrence, Kansas. And I really just love to grow fruits and vegetables. So I'm here to share a little bit about that with you all today. So I've got a little presentation I'm going to run through here, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. So I was excited to learn all of the things you're interested in growing, and hopefully we can provide you some information that will help you grow a great garden this year. So I'm going to do a little presentation here. I'll share my screen. And yeah, I think that should be sharing. If it's not, if Jesse, oh, I saw a thumbs up, so I think I'm.
Yes, we can see it.
All right, great. So I am going to go ahead and share that presentation here. And my goal is to get you ready to grow a garden. In about 3 weeks, one of my co-workers, Rebecca, is going to come on, and she's going to maybe answer all the questions you have after you've started growing your garden, and tell you what to do next. But I'm hoping to help you get ready to put some plants in the ground. All right, and K-State does like to provide services to everyone in the state of Kansas, and we always just like to say that. So in our in-person meetings, if we'd ever be able to meet in person again after the pandemic, we would have this information up in our meeting room. So I like to present it in our Zoom meetings too, so everyone knows that K-State University provides services to everyone in Kansas, and I know there are some of you in Missouri and other places. We like to help everyone. So my goal is to get you ready to plant your garden today. And so we'll talk about a number of things in doing that, including where's a good place to plant a garden? How do you get your ground ready to plant a garden? And I'm going to talk today both about people who want to grow a garden in some ground they have, but also if you want to grow a garden in a container. Containers are great opportunities. If you maybe don't have a spot where you can break up some of your yard or something to grow a garden, containers can be great. So I'll talk about both of those options throughout this talk. I'll give you some ideas on what to grow. There are so many things to grow. It sounds like some of you have some great ideas. I do have some bad news and I didn't write down the name, but whoever said they're going to grow blueberries, I'm not going to talk about growing blueberries today because blueberries are a little bit complicated, but I will give you my information at the end of the talk. If you want to reach out to me afterwards, I'd be happy to talk you through growing blueberries, but they are a little bit more complicated than some of our other vegetables and fruits. So otherwise, we'll talk a lot about how to grow tomatoes, cucumbers, green peppers, and hot peppers. I heard a lot of interest in those things. So that's really exciting to me because I love to eat all of those vegetables too. So after we talk about maybe what you want to grow, I'll talk through different ideas about planting, both again in the ground and in containers. I'll give you some links, including the one I had on that first slide there to the Grow a Garden program, which has links to most of the information I'm going to talk about today. So it's a really helpful thing because we've got a lot of things to cover today. So it's often overwhelming if you're just starting gardening. So it's nice to go back and be able to look at some of the diagrams, some of the information I'm sharing. So we'll show you where to find all of that. And then finally, at the end of my talk here, I'm going to be willing and able to hopefully answer all the questions you have. So first-time gardeners or people that have been gardening for a few years, there's often a lot of things to ask, some of which hopefully I'll cover here, but often things that I don't think about answering. So I'll be able to answer those at the end there. If you can come up with questions, feel free to share them at the end. All right, so when we're choosing a garden site, where to locate our garden, the most important thing we need to think about is really sunlight. So most of the vegetables and fruits we want to grow require what we call full sun, which is more than 6 hours of sunlight during the day. Especially if you have something that you're going to eat a fruit off of that, like a cucumber or tomato or something like that, they definitely need full sun. Some of the leafy greens, which are really great, they're really nutrition powerhouses, they can get away with a little less sun, but if you have something that you're trying to eat a full fruit off of, definitely need sunlight. And so for everything, that should be your first choice. Once you start, especially if you're digging in the ground, good drainage is important. Here where I'm at in Lawrence area, we have a lot of clay soil that doesn't drain very well. So if you see a spot in your yard where after you get a rain, water is standing there for many hours, that's probably not the best place to put your garden. You want to put it somewhere that water can drain off pretty easily. But in addition to not having too much water, not holding too much water, when you're growing vegetables, you really want to have a site that has good access to water. So someplace you can take a hose to, or if it's a small garden, maybe you have a watering can you can take out to that garden. But lots of our fruits and vegetables are pretty finicky. They need a good amount of water. And in Kansas, you know, the weather can change day to day, hour to hour. So if things get really dry, we need to be able to provide water to our vegetables if we want to keep them alive and healthy. So when you're looking for your garden, if you have to carry a water can, you probably don't want to put your garden at the farthest back corner of your yard because that could be a long ways to carry it. So when you're thinking about what's a good place to put your garden, thinking about where is an easy place to get water to is really important. You know, we are in Kansas. Wind is a big issue here. Some place that has a little bit of protection from the wind. So like I said, vegetables are pretty finicky. If you're on top of a hill and you plant those vegetables right on top and they just get hit by the wind all day and all night, they might not do that well. So someplace that's a little bit protected, so maybe behind your house or behind a fence, where they can still get sun, but maybe they have a little bit of protection from the wind, is a good place to think about planting that garden. Another thing that can be a problem can be trees. So besides just shading out areas, so maybe not giving your garden full sun, those trees can really take water and some of the nutrients away from your garden plants. So if it's at all possible, when you're thinking about putting a garden, especially if you're putting one in ground, putting it as far away from the trees as you can is good. And obviously there's a lot of different things to balance there. So maybe the place that's farthest away from your trees is at the back corner of your property, and you have to carry water there. So that maybe isn't the best place. Maybe you'll have a little bit more, make it a little closer to your trees. So this is trying to decide, but really these are all factors that if you take them into account, you know, you can hopefully find a good garden spot. Now, for people, if you don't have ground to put the garden into or available ground, or if you just don't have a good spot, raised beds or container gardens can be really great for that. So if you make raised beds like I have in this picture here, so people like those a lot, framed out of wood. And if we make them out of wood, we want to use non-treated wood if we're growing food in there. But making those raised beds can make the garden a little bit easier to get into. So you don't have to bend over quite as far to get to your plants. But it can also, in this time of year, in the spring, it'll help your soil warm up faster. And that will make your crops healthier and happier overall. So raised beds can be good, but also you can move containers around. I know a lot of you who signed up for this indicated you'd be interested in gardening in containers. So those are probably even smaller than the raised beds I have in the picture here. And maybe you can put those on the patio. And if you have a small enough container, you can kind of move it around to where the sun is as the sun changes throughout the season. So those can be good options. One of the really nice things, if you do have a heavy clay soil, like a lot of the people around my area do, is these raised beds and containers can really help with the drainage and aeration of your soil. So if you have areas where water stands a long time, I said that's not a great place for a garden. Well, a raised bed can help with that problem, and a container can do even better. So it really keeps your plant roots healthy because water isn't standing in those containers. And containers can offer that flexibility in location. So you can move them around as long as you don't have a giant container that weighs a ton. You can move it around to different locations as the season progresses. So this time of year, the sun is moving further north, and it will change where the shadows are throughout the day. And then in the middle of the summer, it will be kind of overhead and have a different area that gets shade and doesn't get shade. So containers are nice because you can move your plants around a little bit. If you don't have that perfect spot in your yard, they give you some options. The one thing I will say about containers and raised beds, I say they help the soil drain so it doesn't hold too much water, but that's also kind of a problem for them too. So you need to make sure to adjust your irrigation accordingly. So if you are growing in containers, you need to be ready to water them a little bit more frequently than if you're just growing in the ground. So because they're so much better drained than the regular soil, you have to make sure that they have enough water. So keeping them watered is really important with containers. And I'll talk a little bit about choosing different kinds of containers, but in general, the smaller the container you grow your plants in, the more often you have to water, the more often you have to make sure that there's enough water in there. So we'll talk about that, but I'll be happy to answer questions too about that. And so if you're getting ready to grow these, and now I'll start talking about the two different options. So I'll talk first about growing things in containers and then growing things in the ground. So if you're getting ready to grow in a container garden, and that could even be something like you see in this picture here, which is kind of a raised bed, but just built up on legs so that the gardeners don't even have to bend over to get into that garden. You need to choose a container that fits your location. So here you see that's a nice fit with those raised legs. People can get there, and this is actually made as an accessible garden. So people can come right up to those raised beds on that hard concrete surface. But if you only have a little bit of area, you probably need a smaller container. If you have a bigger area, you can go with a bigger container. And in general, bigger is better just because they're a little bit more forgiving. So if you water a little container, it's going to dry out really fast. A bigger container will dry out a little bit slower. It will have a little bit more nutrients. So your plants will be a little bit need a little bit less care. If you have a really small container, you're going to have to keep your eye on them, make sure that they have enough water, make sure that they have enough fertilizer to keep growing. So in general, if you have the option with the space you have to work with between a little container and a bigger container, it's generally easier to grow a garden in a bigger container. And then with these containers, you don't just want to go dig up the soil that's in the ground and put it into that box. You're going to want to choose what we call a planting media. That's a really fancy term. Sometimes they're called potting mixes. But basically, these are specially mixed products, and you can buy them at garden centers. There's a lot of different options, but any good potting mix should work. But in general, they're not quite as heavy as a garden soil, so they don't weigh as much, but also they allow that good drainage that we look for in containers. So sometimes if people just buy a container and then dig something out of their yard and put it in that container, that soil gets really compacted and heavy, and you can't really grow much in there. So you want to put the right mix in there. And for container gardenings, that's often something you'll buy at a garden center. If you are growing in the ground, the best recommendation I have for wherever your garden site is to start with a soil test. And now that takes a couple of weeks, and we're just right up here on the planting window. But this will allow you to make sure your garden has the right amount of fertilizer in it. So to take a soil test, you want to take either in this picture you see a soil probe, or you can just use a little trowel and take 6 or 8 little scoops from that area where your garden's going to be, and you mix those together. And then you take those to your local extension office, and we'll send them to the lab and give you results, which will tell you how much fertilizer you need to add to your garden. If you're doing a container, when you buy that potting media, that's going to have the right amount of fertilizer in there, or it should have the right amount of fertilizer in there. So you don't need to do a soil test if you're doing a container, but if you're growing in the ground, a soil test can be helpful because we don't know what kind of nutrients are out there in your garden until we do a test. And I'll give you a link here at the end and a map that shows you where your local extension office is if you don't know. And they're also a great source for answering all of your gardening questions. So next, after you take your soil test, or if you don't take a soil test, when you're getting ready to garden in the ground, the first step is to mark out your area. So know where you're going to grow your garden. And then a good first thing to do is to add some kind of organic matter. So you go to garden centers and you can buy bags of compost, or sometimes people will add leaves or other things. But that organic matter is going to help your soil be really healthy in your new garden space. So you want to add that before you start preparing your garden soil. And then you want to work up your soil. If you're growing in the ground, preparing a nice seed bed is the important step. So after you've hopefully added some organic matter, you want to mix that in with the soil that's out there. So you can do that by hand. You can take a shovel and turn over your garden and mix the soil together with that organic matter. Or some people will use a rototiller. That's a pretty common way to do that if you have access to a rototiller for a bigger garden especially. But the goal when you're doing that is to do it as little as possible. So you want a nice area that you can plant in, so some nice dark turned over soil, but you don't just want to keep doing that over and over. So as little as we can disturb that soil, the better. It creates a more natural system for our plants to grow in. The other thing that's really hard in the spring especially, so if you're getting ready to garden, I don't know what the moisture situation looks like across the state, but if your soil is really wet and you go out and you try and make that seed bed, you can really hurt the soil quite a bit. So you want to wait till your soil's nice and dry. So one way to do that is where you're going to make a garden, if you dig up a little bit of soil and squeeze it into a ball, if it stays together in a ball when you push on it, or it leaks any water, that's too wet. But if it crumbles when you push on it a little bit, crumbles really nicely, that means you have a good amount of moisture in there to be able to go out and work that soil up. So that's how you would prepare your garden and get ready for planting if you're going in ground. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can grow here. So we're kind of right now, I know you're getting ready to kick off your program officially next week, and we're kind of in this transition phase. So we have what we call cool season vegetables and warm season vegetables. And we can still plant some of the cool season, even though things are starting to warm up. And we can plant warm season vegetables probably. So that one, depending on where you at, you kind of have to watch the weather. And I'll talk about that just a little bit in more detail. But those cool season vegetables, so these are things like lettuce, radishes, spinach, carrots, and any of the leafy greens. They really like the cool weather. And they'll do great if you go out and plant them right now. If you wait a month or 2 months, they're not going to do as good because it gets really hot in this part of the country. And those plants just won't do very well. So if you're going to plant those cool season vegetables, you definitely want to do that soon. So if you start your garden next week, that would be a great time to plant some of those. If you're a little bit delayed in starting, maybe you want to look for more of these warm season vegetables. So warm season vegetables, a lot of these are things that you all named on your lists of favorite vegetables. So these are things like tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, peppers, and hot peppers, melons, sweet potatoes, pumpkin, squash, and eggplant. And so while I say cool season vegetables, you need to hurry up and plant, these warm season vegetables, we're just about ready to start planting some of those. So it's actually been just a little bit cold to plant most of those, but maybe in 2 or 3 weeks will be just the perfect time to start a lot of those. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So here's a chart we have, and this comes from this publication, and there's a link to that if you want to go back, so you don't have to look at this and memorize everything I tell you. But you can go back to that, and that link is on the Grow a Garden webpage that I linked at the beginning at the end. So you can find this. But if you look here, this is the Kansas Vegetable Garden Calendar. And these boxes that are kind of clear, like the top one here says beets, and then in April, and then you look over in June, and then beets is in purple. So the boxes that kind of are just an outline is when you plant that, and then the boxes that are solid purple is when to harvest that. So you can see here in April, we're just at the end of April. Things that are good to plant here are things like beets, collard greens, chard, carrots. We're maybe a little bit late for spring broccoli. Some years you can get away with it. Some years, if it gets warm really early, it doesn't work. So that's kind of in that, it's maybe a risky bet. And we're just coming on to the period here where you'd plant beans or cucumbers or eggplant. And so this is just one half of this chart. I'll go to the next half here. So you can see, you can plant a little bit of lettuce here, and you'll get a harvest maybe in June. And then some of these things like peppers, really like a warmer season. So we usually like to wait maybe until the 1st or 2nd week of May to plant those peppers. And then you'll be harvesting those in August. Radishes, you could plant some radishes now and you'd be harvesting them in late May. So different plants take different times to get to an edible stage. Spinach you could still plant, but we're just kind of on the early side of a lot of these things you like to mention. The cucumbers, I heard somebody say sweet corn, tomatoes, watermelons. So those are things that we're just coming into the time. So if you go out and prepare your garden now, you'll be ready to plant those in a week or 2 and have hopefully great success with that. So this is a map here, and you can't see the lines as distinctly as I would like. This is a map of the state of Kansas, more or less, and you see these different colors, and each different color is related to when we get our last freeze. And so this blue area in the top, that's Northwest Kansas here, and they get their last spring freeze pretty late, so late May often. But here I'm in Douglas County. Hopefully you can see my cursor. So I'm right on the county. Actually, I could probably put it right where my house is at there. And my normal last spring freeze, according to this, would be sometime between April 3rd and April 9th. Well, it's April 22nd, and we had a really, really hard freeze last night here. So it was 25 degrees at my house this morning. So if I had planted any of those warm season vegetables, any of the tomatoes or the peppers, they would have all died last night, but I didn't because we're early on. So that's why we want to wait a little bit of time. So some of those plants, those warm season plants, really can't tolerate any freezing temperatures. So we try and wait until we were out of that window when freezing temperatures would occur, and hopefully we'll get some crops. So what should you grow? My number one answer to that is, if you're trying to decide what vegetables to grow, what do you like to eat? And I have this picture of radishes here because I think radishes are one of the most stunningly beautiful vegetables, and I really like to eat radishes. They're very easy to grow. So if you like to eat radishes, I encourage you to grow them. But a lot of people don't like to eat them. So if you don't like to eat radishes, even though they're easy to grow and beautiful, you maybe don't want to grow them. How much space do you have? So different vegetables take different amounts of spaces, and the information that's available to you can show you some of that, but a tomato plant will get really big versus a radish, which is really tiny. So if you just have a little bit of space, you might want to choose some of those smaller vegetables. If you have a lot of space, you can grow a lot of big plants, big tomatoes, big cucumbers, which vine out all over the place. So that's an important thing to think about when you're planting your garden. How much time do you have? Some take more time than others. If you have a small garden, that's not maybe a biggest issue, but if you have a bigger garden, some things take a long time to go out and pull the weeds around, to take care of them. And so Rebecca, who's going to talk here in 3 weeks, is going to give you some of that information about managing things. But in general, think about that. If you have gigantic plants, they often take a little bit more time to go out and harvest. You can choose a small variety of tomato or a big tomato plant, and they'll take different amounts of time. But really, you want to choose the things that are really valuable to you. So the things you like to eat. If you don't have a lot of space, look for varieties that say they're very productive. They grow a lot of food, and really most of all, the things you like to eat. So this slide here has a lot of information. When you go looking for vegetables, there's lots of different varieties, or fruits too. So there's lots of different varieties, and it can become overwhelming to try and choose a certain variety. So if you go to the store and you want to buy carrots, maybe there's 20 different types of carrots, and you wonder, how do I choose what's a good kind of carrot? So here are some websites. This All American Selections is a good site that tells you what are really good varieties of carrots, for example, or any other vegetable. K-State also has a list in our bookstore here. So I put the link to the bookstore. We have a list, and this is linked on the Grow a Garden page, but of recommended vegetable varieties. So these are things that do well in Kansas. And sorry for those of you in Missouri or other areas, but these are resources that do well in Kansas, and maybe have good productivity. But there's all kinds of different information about choosing varieties. So if you're growing in a container, you're probably going to want to look for a dwarf or a miniature variety of a lot of things. If you're growing in that maybe the southwest part of Kansas, where it's hotter and drier than the rest of the state, You might want to look for some varieties that say they do well with heat or have some other tolerance. And there's also things that are just, they're good at other things. So if you've gardened for a number of years and you have a disease problem, sometimes there's a variety that is good for handling a certain disease. And then how do you know besides the websites that I gave you? This is a page from a catalog, but if you go to garden centers, if you're looking to buy plants at a garden center, often they'll have little tags in the plants, and those will have similar information here. So these are all different types of tomatoes, different varieties. And I've just circled here some of the information you might want to look for. So Pole Big is a type of tomato, and it takes 60 days to maturity. So after you plant it, in 60 days or 2 months, basically, you should start getting tomatoes. This other tomato here I've circled, Defiant, it takes 70 days. So it will take you 10 more days to get a tomato off that one. So if you're a little late in this season, you probably want to go for the fast plant. Another thing you can look for here, Pole Big says it's a very compact plant, and it does well in cool climates. So if you're maybe on the northern part of the state, or you're growing in a container, having a compact and small plant would be beneficial. Something that is tolerant of cool weather can be good. If you're planting it early and there may be a little bit of cold weather, having that cold tolerance can be good. So you just have to read the little labels that come in the plants, or if you're ordering seeds for other things, reading what's in there can help you choose a good variety. There's all kinds of other things that gardeners like to choose on besides just how long it takes to grow. Lots of different vegetables, even of the same types, have different flavor. Lots of fun colors. If you go to the grocery store, maybe every carrot you see is orange. But if you want to grow carrots in your garden, you can find purple carrots, you can find yellow carrots, you can find white carrots. So you can choose all sorts of different colors, different textures. There's all kinds of different textures of tomatoes, at different sizes, different fun shapes. Some will produce more and some will produce less. Lots of different things to choose from. And some are even marketed that they're easy to grow. So if it's your first time gardening, that might be something you want to look for on those plant labels. It says easy to grow. So that might, for whatever reason, be something that's easier for you to succeed with. And there's nothing more fun in the garden than actually succeeding, and probably nothing more fun, more frustrating than planting something, waiting 2 months and not getting anything out of it. So definitely, if it's your first time gardening, go for success and try and find those easy to grow options. So when we plant things, after you've chosen what you want to grow, we look at two different things. So there's transplanting, which is taking a big plant and sticking it in the ground. And so this would be something at this point in the year that you'd be buying from a garden center. So if you're buying a living plant, what you want to do is you want to make sure you get that plant ready to plant it out into your garden. So we call that process hardening off. So if they're in the garden center, they've been living in a nice greenhouse maybe. They're protected from all those things we talked about earlier, the harsh sun, the winds of Kansas, maybe a dry spell. So you want to slowly get those used to living outside before you stick them in your garden. So this can be moving them out into the sun for a few hours a day, and then taking them back into the shade, making sure they have lots of water when they're really young, and just taking care of them for maybe 7 to 10 days after you buy them from the store, and then put them in your garden so they'll be a little bit ready to be outside if they're used to growing in a greenhouse. And you really want to try and ease them into the garden. So if you think about it, like you as a person, you go outside, if you've been inside all winter and you go outside and it's 90 degrees and it's sunny and windy, like that's really kind of a hard day to be outside. It's the same for your plants. So if they've been in a greenhouse, protected and sheltered, you've hardened them off a little bit, you've slowly acclimated them to the outside world, You want to wait maybe for a cool, cloudy day to plant them so that they're not just shocked by that harsh sun and wind. You just want to kind of try and, as much as you can, ease them into the garden. The other option for putting plants into your garden is to do direct seeding. So this is taking seeds and putting them into your garden. So there is some information for all kinds of different varieties. A lot of them where we grow a whole bunch of plants are often direct seeded. So things like carrots, tomatoes, not tomatoes, excuse me, carrots, radishes, spinach, where we grow a lot of plants. And then often things where we just grow one plant or a few plants, those are things we'll transplant. So that would be tomatoes. Sorry for misspeaking there, or maybe watermelon or a few things like that where you just plant one plant. So direct seeding, if you're taking the seeds and putting them in the ground, you just want to make sure you space those out adequately. And often we plant too many seeds, and then we want to go back through and thin them out so they have enough space between each plant. And you also want to make sure you plant them the right depth. So you want to plant them, if they're a little seed, you plant them pretty shallow. If they're a bigger seed, you can plant them deeper. But often we'll see people planting, the little tiny like lettuce seed, and if you put it in an inch deep, you're not going to get any lettuce because it doesn't have enough energy to grow all that way up. But if you have a big pumpkin seed, you could probably put that in 3/4 of an inch deep, and it would have enough energy to grow up. So make sure you plant your seeds at the appropriate depth. And again, those resources that are on the Grow a Garden webpage have information. If you're curious, how deep can I plant this radish seed? There's a chart that will tell you. So here are just some examples about different planting things. So if you've got a container and you're growing one, it's about a 16-inch pot. Here's a couple of different examples. So that's, well, you can't probably see on the screen, or it depends on how big your screen is, but 16 inches, is a little bit bigger than a foot. So here's an example that has 8 carrots and 8 beets. So these little shapes here are the beets, and these are the carrots. And you can see you can fit a lot of those in a 16-inch pot, versus here's one where this thing here is a tomato plant and then a couple of little herbs. So if you have a 16-inch pot, you can grow a lot of little things, or maybe one big thing, and maybe squeeze in a few little herbs. Again, this is a bigger pot, a 24-inch pot, so that's 2 feet across, which is a pretty big size pot. And you might be able to get some leafy greens, some salad mix, but you could, if you buy a small tomato plant, maybe you could squeeze 2 tomato plants in there with some of that leafy greens, and then some herbs. So here's some basil. Or if you just wanted to go for smaller things, you could put a whole lot of little things in there. So here's some beans, and some carrots and some radish. Oh, sorry, that's beets and radishes, and some little heads of lettuce. So if you have a bigger pot, you can grow a lot of things, but you do just need to size those appropriately. So there is, these examples came from a publication that's linked there that tells you, kind of based on the size of container you have, how much stuff can you grow in there. And Rebecca McMahon, who's going to be talking to you in a few weeks here, she has some nice layouts for in-ground gardens. So if you're first time growing an in-ground garden and wonder what you can grow, she has some good examples here. So there's the Sedgwick County Extension website has those. And so this is for a 4-foot by 8-foot garden, which is a great size, especially if you're making some of those raised beds. And actually, she's only got this laid out for half of it. Half of this is just in cowpeas, which is kind of a fallow year for that spot. But she's got 2 big tomato plants here, and then 2 pepper plants, and then some herbs in the middle. So for the people that really like salsa, you could grow your tomatoes and hot peppers, and then some herbs to mix in there all together in a 4-foot by 4-foot square. So if you need some ideas or examples, K-State Research and Extension has those for you. We also have a great series. This is probably too small for you to read here, but we have something called the K-State Garden Hour, which is 2 times a month, the 1st and 3rd Wednesdays. We have people giving talks, and I like this because they also are recorded. So if you want to go back through and learn something, but you don't have time to go to that, you can go to the K-State Garden Hour website and look at those recordings. And especially for those of you who are maybe interested in container gardening, the April 7th, we had a workshop on raised bed and container gardenings. So if you need more information about that, there's a whole hour just talking about container gardening. And you can go watch that video. It's up there on the web. Finally, there's this bookstore. So this is an online bookstore. The bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu, and a great resource that compiles probably all of the information I shared with you today and more is the Kansas Garden Guide. And that's available for free on that bookstore. So if you Google Kansas Garden Guide, that will come up, or if you look for it on the bookstore website. So there's some great resources that are out there. And again, the Grow a Garden program, if you go to that website, a lot of these resources and some more are linked up there. So lots of great information if you're starting out growing a garden, good things to learn there. And then finally, here's a link that you can go look for your local extension office. So if you're in Kansas, there's an extension office in every county. Not every county has a horticulture extension agent, but every county has someone that can help you answer your questions about gardening. And if you can't get to your extension office or have some other questions that you need answers to, there's my email, and feel free to reach out to me via email and ask me any questions. I mean, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions people have now, or help out in any other way I can.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. That was wonderful. All right, athletes, this is your time to ask Tom any questions that you might have about gardening at home. I know some of you, like Tom mentioned, have container gardens. Some of you are going to plant directly into the ground. What are some tips or tricks or anything you'd like to ask that Tom can help you with today?
We have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we have some container gardens or garden beds. Is it necessary to rotate what you grow in each bed every year?
That's a great question. And I didn't really talk about that because I think a lot of the people are beginner gardeners.
Okay.
But if you have been gardening before, it is really what we consider a best practice to rotate around every year. And specifically, the things that I really worry about personally are like tomatoes and peppers are in the same family, and they have some soil diseases that they can cross transfer. So you want to rotate those around. So if you could switch out with something that's not one of those two, that would be great. Now, people like to grow a lot of those, so that's often a challenge, but if you can mix that up, that's sort of ideal.
Okay.
I have a question about the dirt. What kind of dirt was it?
So are you growing in a container?
Garden beds, yes.
Garden beds? Yeah, so for containers or garden beds, sometimes if you have a big garden bed, I would say just use the soil that's where you're at. But if you have a smaller ones, if you can buy it's called potting soil sometimes, or potting media often, potting mix, that's got a good a good mix of nutrients and things, so it drains well. Often if you're trying to pile up, a lot of our soils here in Kansas can get really heavy and make it hard to grow. So I'll see people that make a raised bed and then fill it with whatever is around that, and it ends up being really dense and they don't get great results. So some kind of potting media is ideal. But again, if you have a big bed, that gets really expensive. So maybe mixing 50-50 potting media and the soil you have, something like that.
Okay.
I buy all my stuff at Lowe's. I just planted my blueberries. And now I'm waiting for when I go back to Lowe's, when all the plants come in, I just bought my fertilizer and all the dirt.
Uh-huh.
Like before I start putting some dirt and fertilizer, you have to pull weeds. When the weeds go in your plant, it kills your plant.
Yep.
And I have some apple trees and cherry trees, like some fruits in my backyard. How do we keep the bugs off the apple and the birds stay out the cherries? Like birds like cherries.
Yeah, those are really good questions. So for fruit, and for any plants, yeah, you do have to keep up with the weeding. And I think Rebecca's going to talk more about those after you plant kind of tasks, but keeping the weeds out there is really important because they will compete with your plants for nutrients and light and all of those things. But to go to your fruit questions specifically, for cherries, and depending on how big your tree is, often the best way to keep birds off of those is to put a net over them. And you can buy those tree nets some places. But yeah, birds love cherries. So those are maybe their favorite treat. So that can be a challenge. And then for apples and cherries and other fruit, insects can be a problem. So what I would suggest is maybe that's a good opportunity to talk to your local extension agent because there's different ways to manage those insects. Some sprays you can use, but they're not the kind of thing you want to just go out and spray every, so you want to have a plan for how to do that. And your local agent can help you come up with that kind of plan.
Okay.
I have a quick question real quick.
Yeah.
So in some of the starter kits for the athletes, I'm going to offer peat pellets as an option for them. How would we use peat pellets appropriately?
That's a great question. So are they the compressed peat pellets?
They're about like a $50 size.
Yeah, I think I've got some little ones like that. They're and then
yep, that's it.
Yeah. So you put you soak these in water and they expand, and so those are actually great for starting seeds. So they provide just kind of the right environment for starting seeds. And so then you would start your seeds, they would grow on that, and then you would just plant that whole pellet out into your garden.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. So
Yeah.
fair warning, athletes, you're getting peat pellets in your starter kits. So if that's an option, if you want to do that, besides, in a container or like directly into soil. So Becca, I see your hands raised.
I got a question. Like those hanging tree things that you hang, like cherry tomatoes and stuff. Is that would be a good idea to do too?
Yeah, those are interesting. I have never actually grown on one of those. I know exactly what you're talking about, the like upside down tomato holders. And they look really fun. And I have seen people have good success with them. Again, I would think of that just kind of like any other container. So the key to success with those, especially they're often not very big because they're hanging upside down. And so you have to make sure they don't get too dry. So tomatoes don't need a lot of water, but in that small, if that's all the root space they have, and then they're hanging down, you need to just make sure that doesn't get too dry. But if it doesn't, I think that would work just fine.
Would it be okay to use the peat pellets in those along with the soil?
Yeah, you could do that. You just want to make sure you had enough soil to kind of fill it. Those peat pellets off, they wouldn't make much of a dent in one of those containers that I've seen, but just as long as you had enough in there, they would be fine in addition to enough soil.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, good luck.
Good question, Becca. Brandon, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I know my father and I, when we get, I don't know if it's the Boy Scouts, I think they do like a fundraiser where we order a lot of stuff, and over the years, we've done peppers, and he equally spaces them out, and things like that, and it just became where everything just becomes overgrown. I mean, between cherry tomatoes, or if you do heirloom and other tomatoes, they become bunched, and wanted to see how we can keep them growing up high, and the rabbits become an issue. Not only that, but then even squirrels. So how to basically keep tomatoes and the eggplant, and I think it's like cucumbers possibly, and stuff like that. We also do herbs, but to keep the critters, including like rabbits and stuff, away, and basically how to stop it from overgrowing.
Yeah. Yeah, those are, you all are asking the hard questions. So for a lot of those things like rabbits, really the best solution is to put some kind of fencing probably around your garden if you have a lot of rabbits. There isn't much else that really keeps them away. Squirrels can be really frustrating because they'll climb over your fences. So unless you want to grow all of your vegetables in a total cage, sometimes you just, the squirrels are something you can't necessarily solve easily. But to keep things from overgrowing, the best suggestion I would have for that is to just get some good cages. So a lot of those things that like to grow a lot, if you can get them to grow up rather than spreading out into their neighbors, that's a good way to do that. And often that one of the tricky things is often the cages you find in regular hardware stores aren't strong enough, especially if you're growing heirloom tomatoes. Those plants get gigantic, 8 feet tall or something. And so a little cage is just going to topple over. So you really have to get kind of a big cage, or sometimes people will use posts and put in a bunch of posts and then run twine between it and use that to kind of train the plants up. But providing some kind of support and encouraging your plants to grow vertically is a good solution to them leaning on each other. But the animals are really a challenge for anybody.
Okay, is herbs in the same category of? I know, like we have. I think by my father's cooking thing outside, he's doing. We are doing lettuce, and I know we have one out by the tomatoes where, shockingly, a lot of them already came back on their own from last year, like chives and oregano and stuff. But I don't know if there's a specific thing to put over top of them.
Yeah, herbs don't tend to get out of control quite as much unless some of them will spread over time. So if you have chives, you have a little bit this year, next year you'll probably have a little bit more, and over time they'll spread, and you can just cut those back, but they don't get quite as tall, or and then oregano will also spread. Some of those will spread, but they don't usually do that in 1 year. So as long as you kind of keep them trimmed back, they can you can control those.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions, Brandon. So Lena asked a really, really good question, and maybe this will be more for Rebecca's presentation here in a couple of weeks, but what should we do if, our plants are starting to grow and then all of a sudden it decides to snow? What should we do?
Yeah, that is a great question and very timely this week. So it depends on what your plant is. So like I said, there's those cool season vegetables and the warm season vegetables. And so the cool season vegetables at my house on Tuesday morning, we had about 2 inches of snow. And then this morning, the temperature was 25 degrees, and all of those cool season vegetables would do okay with that. But any of those warm season vegetables, tomatoes, anything like that, without any protection, they would have died. So if you have those warm season things and a cold front comes in, and even if we had gotten a lot colder than that, some of those cool season vegetables, you can protect them in small areas by covering them with something. So I've seen people go out and put just a bucket upside down over a tomato plant to protect it from that cold air. Or if you have a number of plants, they sell you can buy a frost cloth at a garden center, but you could also use a sheet if you have one you don't mind getting dirty, something to cover that and trap the heat from the ground to keep them from freezing if we do get a cold snap. And that happens especially, so I know there were some people, it's gardening, if you want to get the earliest crops, gardening's a little bit like gambling. So some years you can plant out a tomato plant on April 15th where I live, and it'll be great. You won't have any more freezes, and everything will be perfect. And then some years you'll get snow the first week of May. We've had that happen too. So if you do plant things early, being ready to have a cover, something to protect it, because it usually doesn't stay cold for too long, but long enough that if you don't protect those plants, there'll be some problem. Great question though.
Thank you so much. I was on mute. Gigi, I see your hand raised.
How much is too much water, or does it just depend on the fruit or the vegetable?
Yes, it does depend on the fruit or the vegetable, and it also depends on how big they are. So a tomato plant, if you just plant it out and it's this big, doesn't need as much water as when it's, like I said, 7 feet tall or whatever. But in general, yeah, you want to water to make sure the plants are happy, and they'll tell you if they're wilting, like they need some water. And in general, the other thing is the littler plants, they don't have a big root system like a big plant does. So maybe that little tomato doesn't need as much water as the big tomato does, but it might need water more often. So watering every couple of days when they're little, but then when they're big and they've got a gigantic root system, you could water once a week and they'd be able to take up enough water. So there's kind of a rule that's 1 inch of water per week. That rule works as kind of a rule of thumb, but sometimes they need more and sometimes they need less. But if you're getting like 1 inch of rain a week, your plants are probably happy. But if you have lots of little plants, they might get too dry in between those rains. So.
Awesome. Good question, Gigi. I kind of want to ask another watering question. I know that so when we use water in a house, it has water softener in it. So when we are watering our plants, like say if we have a container garden inside, should we use faucet water or should we be collecting rainwater or use water from the hose? What's your best recommendation?
If you have a water softener on your house system, you might want to use something that's not on that, but it really shouldn't matter. If you do have house plants and you have a water softener, you might, so every once in a while you need to kind of flush out those house plants. You'll see the salt start building up on top of the plant surface. And at that point, if you take them outside and let it wash out, that stuff will kind of wash out. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, there are some people that say, chlorinated water is bad. Maybe in excess it is, but in general, the sort of tap water you would drink would be just fine.
Okay, awesome, thanks. Anita, I see Anita's hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Do you have, I'm one of the people with my son and we're doing the container garden. Would you be able to recommend he's not very patient. So would you be able to recommend a tomato plant or maybe even a cherry tomato plant, which will start fruiting pretty early?
Most of the cherry tomatoes, that would be a good choice. A lot of them fruit really early compared to larger tomatoes. I don't have a specific variety recommendation. A lot of that is it kind of depends on what's available in your area. But if you're doing a container garden, you're going to want to look for a dwarf variety probably. But any cherry tomato is going to be fruiting about as quickly as you can get on a tomato. So any of those would be a good choice. But again, when you're at the garden center or wherever you're buying your plants, you can look at those tags and they'll usually tell you on there, and that'll be like the days from transplant. So some cherry tomatoes will be 50 days. So 50 days after you plant that, you should have fruit. Some large tomatoes might be 75 days. So, I mean, that's almost 3 weeks difference, or more than 3 weeks difference, excuse me.
When they were younger, they would just pluck them when they were green and eat them. So
Yeah,
guys,
well,
you
yeah,
gotta
that's a
wait.
different problem. Yeah, they do need to wait.
Awesome. Thank you, Anita. Bo, you have a question?
No, I have to go.
Oh, you have to go. All right. Thanks for coming, Bo. We'll see you.
Yeah, I ran a little long. Thanks everyone for showing up. I'm happy to answer more questions though.
Yeah. Addison, do you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go for it.
Okay. So is it hard to grow grapes and oranges, and where can you get the containers at, and where should you get the fruit and vegetables at?
Oh yeah, those are great questions. So it's kind of hard to grow grapes. It's really hard to grow oranges here, only because you would have to have either the right inside environment or some kind of greenhouse, because oranges won't tolerate as cold as it gets here in Kansas. But grapes will, but they take, to get your first harvest of grapes, if you were to go buy a grape plant, would probably take 3 years. So they take a long time to grow big enough to give you something harvestable. And then I don't know where you're located, but in general, my sort of rule of thumb is the best place to buy containers and your plants is from a local garden center. So something maybe that's been in your community, you can buy them at sort of at what they sometimes call the big box stores like Lowe's or Home Depot. But I feel like often the local garden centers, the smaller garden centers have staff that are more knowledgeable and varieties that are maybe more suited to wherever you're located.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to make sure everyone's questions get answered. So is there any other questions before we go?
My garden is my garden's by my neighbor's fence. On the top is my grape. I think we planted sometime we plant like about 6 vegetables, and I have 3 pots of on my back deck. I'm thinking about it like I'm planting my spices. I'm thinking about it make salsa this year.
Yeah, I think especially if you have it sounds like you have a big garden, but especially for people that have a little garden, I feel like one of the best things you can grow is those herbs and spices, because you can take just a little bit and add so much flavor to the food you're making. So if you're making salsa, growing some of those fresh is wonderful. But also, if you're just cooking rice or whatever, having some fresh herbs available is really wonderful.
I use a lot of basil when we make spaghetti in a crock pot. I use 2 or 3 basil leaf, cut it, throw in the spaghetti sauce.
Now you're making me hungry.
Me too. It's almost dinner time, Tyler. Jennifer, I saw you had your hand raised. Oh, Jennifer, can you take yourself off mute? Do you see it?
Okay, I'm not very good with gardening. What's the easiest thing to take care of?
I really like to grow things I like to eat, and there's a few things that in most years are easy to grow. And that said, I've been gardening for over 20 years, and there's some years that those things that are easy just don't work out. So you'd have to give yourself a little bit of grace. So if something doesn't work once, maybe try it again. Just getting some practice is helpful, but even I have lots of practice and things still don't work out for me. But things that I think are really easy, I like to eat radishes, but I think they're the absolute easiest vegetable to grow. They are the shortest to harvest from seed. You can plant them, and in maybe 4 weeks, you'll have something you can eat. And then I think it was Tyler said he liked to grow basil. I think basil is really great too. It's a beautiful plant. It just has so much flavor when you grow it, and it's really not that hard to grow. So.
Yeah, there's many varieties of basil too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of varieties. Yeah.
Anita, do you have one more question?
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about growing corn. Is it really hard?
Is growing corn really hard? I wouldn't say it's really hard, but it does have kind of special requirements. So corn, you have to grow, let's see, probably at least 16 corn plants. So to get the corn that you like to eat, it actually requires cross-pollination. So you can't just grow one corn plant and have anything to eat. You have to grow enough to sort of pollinate each other. So usually about 16 is kind of considered the minimum. And so if those are planted 1 foot apart, that's like a 4x4 block of just corn. So it takes a lot of space. It's wonderful to grow. It's not that hard, but it does take a little bit more space than some other things. So in that 4x4 block, you could probably grow 2 tomato plants and 3 pepper plants. But if you like corn, no, it's not that hard to grow.
And do you have to prepare the soil really well?
You have to prepare it a little bit, maybe better than some other things, just because when you plant corn, it takes a while to come up. So you want to make sure you can have those weeds under control, but you don't have to prepare it too much better. It does like a lot of fertility. So if you have really nice soil that you fertilize, you'll get a better yield, but it doesn't take a lot more preparation, I wouldn't say.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, this is the very last question. We're getting close to 5:15, all right? Gigi, go ahead.
Is it hard to grow sweet potatoes at all?
Ooh, that is a great question. And I didn't answer the question earlier that was going around of what is your favorite vegetable? And sweet potatoes are my favorite vegetable. So I will chime in with that right now. I think sweet potatoes are really easy to grow, actually. And you'll go some places and they actually have a decorative plant called sweet potato vine, which is the same plant. It's just chosen for having pretty leaves rather than having big tubers on the end. So sweet potatoes you can grow. You could actually start all the way from last year's sweet potatoes or something you get at the grocery store that sprouts. And you can plant those sprouts into the ground and they will grow more sweet potatoes. The only thing about sweet potatoes is you need to have the soil really warm before you plant them. So I said, the warm season things like tomatoes and peppers, you could maybe start in 2 weeks. I don't know people that really plant sweet potatoes before early June. You want the soil really warm before you plant those sweet potato slips. And the other thing is they take a long growing season. So you plant them as soon as the soil warms up, but then you leave them out there for a long time. And then they aren't that hard to grow. They don't need a lot of fertilization or anything. And they're really, really nutritious. So they're a great thing to grow.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. This has been super, super valuable, and I don't want to take up too much people's time. I know we're all really busy. Like Tyler said, we're getting close to dinner. So, Tom, I just wanted to ask you real quick, are you going to send me any resources over that I can send out to the athletes and participants from today?
Yeah, so my plan was to send you links to all the links that I had in my presentation and also the presentation as a PDF if you want to share that with anyone. And yeah, I'm happy to answer more questions if people want to email me. But yeah, I'll send you those resources probably tomorrow since it's late today already.
Perfect.
So.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. All right, guys.
Thank you all.
You guys know how to do it. Turn off your mics.
Tom.
Yep.
Unmute yourselves. Let's say thank you on the count of 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, happy gardening.
Thanks, Tom, again.
Thanks.
You guys have a good rest of your evening. It looks like Kathy's about to go for a walk. So we will see you guys all next week. Have a great weekend. Good luck with your gardening, and let's get started. So we'll send you some email tomorrow with more information, and we'll stay in contact. And Rebecca will be here in about 3 or 4 weeks to talk about what you need to do after your plants start sprouting, which is going to be really exciting. So we'll stay in touch, and I hope you guys all have a great weekend. We'll see ya.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.